Rosie is a successful architect who dreams of a family and a real feeling. When the charming widower Victor enters her life, everything seems perfect. But behind the beautiful picture lies lies, manipulation, and betrayal. This is the story of a woman who went through pain to find herself. A story of how expensive happiness can be, but how important it is to earn it.
Welcome to the Important Stories channel. If you like my story, give me a like and subscribe. It's important to me, and we continue.
Rosie, 32, a successful architect, stood by the window of her spacious apartment. Beyond the glass, the lights of the evening city twinkled, each one seeming to reflect her own loneliness. Her life, at first glance, was perfect: a prestigious job, the respect of colleagues, her own home. But deep down, there was a longing for warmth and closeness, for the family she had long dreamed of. Her friend, Sophia, often said, "Rosie, you're like living in a glass tower. You have everything, but no happiness." Rosie would only smile bitterly in response. She mentally revisited past relationships, each of which had ended in disappointment. Either the men weren't ready for serious relationships, or her career became an obstacle. Rosie spent her evenings alone, sometimes with a book, sometimes working. Weekends were often filled with meetings with friends, but even in a noisy company, she felt detached from everyone. In her heart lived hope, a small spark that refused to go out. She believed that somewhere there was that person with whom she could build a real family. One day, returning home after a hard day at work, Rosie noticed an advertisement for a contemporary art exhibition. Maybe this is a chance, she thought, deciding it was worth getting out. Little did she know that this spontaneous idea would change her whole life. There were many people in the gallery, but Rosie's gaze caught on one painting. It depicted a lonely lighthouse standing on a rocky shore. In it, she saw a reflection of her own soul. Lost in thought, she didn't notice someone approaching her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she heard a male voice. Rosie turned around and saw a middle-aged man. His eyes shone with kindness, and a gentle smile invited conversation. "Yes, there's something about it," Rosie replied, feeling a strange excitement stirring inside her. They started talking. The man's name was Victor. He turned out to be a widower raising an 8-year-old son. Victor told her about his life, his work, his son. Rosie listened, mesmerized by his sincerity and openness. For the first time in a long time, she felt understood. The evening flew by unnoticed. When it was time to say goodbye, Victor suggested they meet again. "I'd be happy to see you again, Rosie," he said, his gaze full of hope. "Me too, Victor," Rosie replied, feeling her heart begin to thaw. She returned home with a feeling of lightness and anticipation. For the first time in a long time, hope had settled in her soul. Maybe this is the beginning of something new? Rosie thought, falling asleep with a smile on her lips. She dreamed of lighthouses and warm embraces. She didn't yet know that this dream would turn into a nightmare. The following weeks flew by for Rosie like a dream. She and Victor met almost every day. They walked in parks, went to the cinema, and had dinner in cozy cafes. Victor told Rosie about his work, his son Freddie, and his sick mother, who required constant care. Rosie listened, and her heart filled with sympathy and admiration. It seemed to her that Victor was a real man, caring, attentive, and understanding. Freddie, an 8-year-old boy with big brown eyes, was initially distant. He was quiet and withdrawn, as if afraid to become attached to anyone. But gradually, thanks to Rosie's patience and kindness, he began to open up. Rosie took him to the zoo, read him fairy tales, and helped him with his homework. She tried to become his friend, not just a new woman in his father's life. One evening, after dinner at a restaurant, Victor drove Rosie home. When they pulled up to her building, he suddenly fell silent. Rosie felt the tension building in the car. "Rosie," Victor began, his voice sounding a little uncertain, "there's something I want to tell you." Rosie became wary. Something in his tone made her feel a slight unease. Tell me, Victor, I'm listening, she replied, trying to remain calm. Victor took a deep breath and looked Rosie straight in the eyes. I've fallen in love with you, Rosie. You become a very important person to me. And I want you to be a part of my life, my family. Rosie froze. She hadn't expected such a confession. Her heart beat faster, and her cheeks flushed. She had always dreamed of hearing these words, but now that they had been spoken, she felt not only joy but also a slight bewilderment. Victor, Rosie began, her voice trembling, you become very dear to me too. I appreciate your honesty and care. But what, Rosie? Victor interrupted, his gaze becoming anxious. But you have Freddie and your mother. That's a big responsibility. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. Victor took her hand in his. Rosie, I understand your fears. But I'm sure you can be a wonderful mother to Freddie. And my mother, she'll love you too, I know it. Rosie looked into his eyes. She saw sincerity and love in them. Her heart softened. She had always dreamed of a family, and now it seemed her dream was coming true. Okay, Victor, Rosie whispered, I agree. Victor hugged her joyfully. Thank you, Rosie. You've made me the happiest man in the world. They sat in the car for a long time, talking about the future, about the wedding, about their life together. Rosie felt her fears receding, replaced by hope. She believed that with Victor she could build a strong and happy family. She didn't yet know that bitter disappointment awaited her. Preparations for the wedding were in full swing. Rosie plunged headfirst into the pleasant chores, choosing a dress, booking a restaurant, compiling a guest list. Her eyes sparkled with happiness, and it seemed that all her dreams were finally coming true. Victor was also full of enthusiasm, although sometimes a shadow of worry crossed his face. One day, when Rosie was choosing a wedding dress, her friend Daisy came into the salon. She was one of those who always told the truth to your face, not afraid to offend. Rosie, the dress is stunning, Daisy exclaimed, admiring Rosie in the snow-white attire. But what, Daisy? Rosie became wary, noticing her hesitation. Daisy hesitated. You know, Rosie, I'm glad you've finally met someone. But Victor, he's a bit strange. Strange? How strange? Rosie wondered. Well, I don't know. He always talks so much about his problems, his debts, his sick mother. It's like he's trying to make you feel sorry for him. Rosie frowned. She had never thought about it from that angle. Victor did often complain about financial difficulties, but she had attributed it to his honesty. Daisy, you're just jealous, Rosie tried to joke. You know how long I've been alone. Maybe I am jealous, Daisy agreed. But, Rosie, be careful. Love is blind, and marriage is serious. Rosie waved her words away. She didn't want to hear any warnings. Her heart was overflowing with love and hope, and she didn't want anyone to cloud her happiness. However, Daisy's words stuck in her mind. A small seed of doubt settled in her heart, and sometimes it made itself known. For example, when Victor insisted too much that she take on most of the wedding expenses. Or when he avoided talking about his past. One evening, when they were having dinner at a restaurant, Rosie decided to talk to Victor about his family. Victor, tell me more about your mother, she asked. I want to get to know her better. Victor frowned. Rosie, my mother is very ill. It's hard for her to communicate with new people. I think it's better to wait until after the wedding. Rosie felt a pang of disappointment. She wanted to become part of his family, but Victor seemed to be shielding her from it. Okay, she replied quietly. The evening ended, and Rosie returned home with a heavy heart. Daisy's words and Victor's behavior made her think. She tried to drive away the thoughts, but they kept coming back. Deep down, Rosie felt that something was wrong. But she was afraid to admit it to herself. She so wanted to believe in a fairy tale, in the love that had finally come into her life. She was afraid that if she opened her eyes, the fairy tale would shatter. But the premonition of a storm was growing stronger. And Rosie understood that sooner or later she would have to face the truth. The wedding day arrived. The morning began with a pleasant bustle. Rosie woke up in anticipation, her heart beating rapidly, like a small bird in a cage. The apartment was filled with an atmosphere of joy and excitement. Her friends bustled around her, helping with her hair and makeup. Rosie's mother, holding back tears, hugged her daughter and whispered words of blessing. Rosie looked in the mirror and saw a beautiful bride in the reflection. The snow-white dress fit her figure perfectly, emphasizing her slender frame. Light makeup made her eyes even more expressive. She looked happy and radiant. When it was time to go to the registry office, Rosie felt a slight. She got into the ribbon-decorated car and looked out the window. The city streets, filled with life and movement, passed by. It seemed the whole world was holding its breath in anticipation of this important event. Guests had already gathered at the registry office. Rosie saw Victor standing at the altar. He looked elegant in his suit, but there was a strange tension in his eyes. Rosie tried to smile at him, but he only returned a weak smile. The ceremony began. Rosie walked towards the altar, feeling the gazes of the guests on her. She looked only at Victor, trying to find love and confidence in his eyes. But instead, she saw only anxiety and a kind of detachment. The vows were spoken, and Rosie and Victor exchanged rings. At that moment, she felt a slight chill run down her spine. Something was wrong, but she couldn't understand what it was. After the ceremony, there was a celebratory banquet at the restaurant. Guests congratulated the newlyweds, wishing them happiness and love. Rosie tried to smile and be welcoming, but a vague unease gnawed at her deep down. During the first dance, Victor was silent and stiff. He didn't look Rosie in the eyes, and his movements were uncertain. Rosie tried to start a conversation, but Victor replied monosyllabically and avoided her gaze. "Victor, what's wrong?" Rosie asked quietly as they danced. "You're acting strange." Victor sighed. "Everything's fine, Rosie," he replied. "Just a little tired." Rosie didn't believe him. She felt he was hiding something. But she decided not to spoil the celebration and postpone relationship dispute until later. The evening ended. The newlyweds returned to Rosie's apartment. Silence and emptiness awaited them there. Rosie hoped that here, alone, they could have a heart-to-heart talk. But Victor immediately went to the shower and then went to bed, citing fatigue. Rosie was left alone in the living room, her heart filled with a misunderstanding. This day, which was supposed to be a fairy tale, turned into disappointment and a premonition of trouble for her. She didn't yet know that this was only the beginning of her trials. The first few weeks of living together flew by in a flurry of settling in. Victor moved his and Freddie's belongings into Rosie's apartment. The rooms that had once seemed so spacious now felt cramped and cluttered. Rosie tried to create a cozy atmosphere, but she felt that something invisibly had changed. Victor had become different. He was no longer as attentive and caring as before. He often disappeared until late, citing work, and hardly helped around the house. Rosie felt more like a housekeeper than a wife. Freddie also didn't bring harmony to their lives. He was withdrawn and uncommunicative, often moody, and prone to tantrums. Rosie tried to find common ground with him, but all her attempts ended in failure. One evening, when Rosie returned from work, she saw Victor sitting on the sofa watching television. Freddie was playing a computer game next to him. The apartment was a mess, and there was a mountain of dirty dishes in the kitchen. "Victor, what is this?" Rosie couldn't hold back. "Why is it such a mess?" Victor shrugged. "What is it?" "I'm tired." And I'm not tired? Rosie retorted indignantly. I work too. And I'm not obligated to come home and clean up after everyone. Well, you're a woman, Victor replied calmly. It's your duty. Rosie gasped with indignation. My duty? She exclaimed. I'm not your servant. They quarreled. Victor accused Rosie of selfishness and ingratitude, and Rosie shouted about his laziness and irresponsibility. Freddie looked at them fearfully, his eyes filling with tears. In the evening, when everyone had gone to bed, Rosie couldn't fall asleep for a long time. She tossed and turned in bed, her thoughts in complete disarray. She remembered Daisy's words, her warnings. And with bitterness, she realized that her friend had been right. Victor turned out to be completely different from how he had seemed at first. He was selfish, lazy, and irresponsible. He had used Rosie to solve his financial problems and ensure a comfortable life for himself. Rosie felt deceived and betrayed. Her dream of a happy family had shattered into pieces. She realized she had made a huge mistake by marrying Victor. In the morning, she woke up with a firm decision. She would no longer tolerate such treatment. As the financial problems worsened, Rosie began to notice other alarming signs in Victor's behavior. His frequent absences, his evasive answers to questions about work, his constant phone conversations that he would cut short when Rosie entered the room. All of this added up to a picture that aroused more and more suspicion in Rosie. One evening, when Victor was late from work again, Rosie decided to check his computer. She knew it was wrong, an invasion of privacy, but curiosity and growing anxiety outweighed her moral principles. She opened his browser history and saw many dating sites. Rosie's heart pounded wildly. She scrolled down the page and saw Victor's photos, his profile, his correspondence with other women. Rosie felt the ground slip away from under her feet. Her world, which she had so carefully built, was collapsing before her eyes. She realized that Victor was not just irresponsible and selfish, he was also a liar. She closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. Her body trembled, and one thought pulsed in her head: he's cheating on me. When Victor returned home, Rosie didn't make a scene. She decided to gather evidence before accusing him. She wanted to know the whole truth, no matter how bitter it might be. For several days, Rosie watched Victor. She recorded his phone calls, checked his messages, and followed his movements. And what she discovered exceeded all her worst fears. Victor wasn't just communicating with other women, he was meeting them. He was spending Rosie's money on expensive gifts and restaurants. He lied to her face, looking her in the eyes. Rosie felt betrayed and humiliated. She realized that all her dreams of love and happiness were just an illusion. She had married a man she didn't know at all. One evening, when Victor returned home, Rosie was waiting for him. She placed printouts of his correspondence, photos with other women, and his bank statements in front of him. Victor paled. He tried to justify himself, to lie again, but Rosie didn't give him a single chance. Enough, Victor, she said, her voice cold and firm. I know the truth. You're cheating on me. Victor fell silent. He realized he had been exposed, that his lies no longer worked. I don't know what to say, he mumbled. I don't need your words, Rosie replied. Get out of my house. Victor tried to persuade Rosie, to beg for forgiveness, but she was adamant. She no longer believed a single word he said. That night, Rosie slept alone in the empty apartment. She felt broken and devastated, but at the same time, she experienced a strange relief. The web of lies that Victor had spun had finally been destroyed. And Rosie was ready to start a new life. After Victor left, Rosie sank into the abyss of despair. Her world, which she had so carefully built, collapsed in an instant. She felt deceived, betrayed, humiliated. It seemed to her that all her dreams of love and happiness were just an illusion, that she would never be able to trust anyone again. Rosie spent the first few days after the breakup alone, avoiding calls and meetings. She couldn't bear to see sympathetic glances, couldn't listen to words of support. She needed time to process what had happened, to realize the scale of the catastrophe. But gradually, with each passing day, the pain began to subside. Rosie, like a wounded animal, licked her wounds, piecing together the fragments of her broken soul. She remembered Daisy's words, her support, her belief that Rosie was strong and could handle anything. Rosie began to return to life. She went back to work, met with friends, and exercised again. She tried to fill the emptiness left by Victor's departure with new experiences, new emotions. However, the past didn't let her go so easily. Memories of Victor and Freddie, like shadows, haunted her in every corner of the apartment. She saw their things, heard their voices, felt their presence. One evening, when Rosie returned from work, she discovered that someone had been in the apartment. Some things were overturned, drawers pulled out. Rosie was frightened. She called the police. The arriving police officers inspected the apartment and concluded that it was an attempted robbery. But nothing valuable was missing. Rosie wondered. What could Victor have been looking for? A few days later, Rosie received a strange message from Victor. "Rosie, I need money," he wrote. "I'm in trouble." Rosie ignored the message. She no longer wanted anything to do with him. But Victor didn't give up. He called, wrote, and came to her work. He begged, threatened, and manipulated. He tried to win her back, but Rosie remained adamant. "Enough, Victor," she said one day when he ambushed her near the office. "It's over between us. Leave me alone." Victor didn't listen to her. He continued to stalk Rosie, trying to extort money from her and win her back. Rosie felt her patience running out. She realized that Victor wouldn't back down until she took decisive action. She decided to consult a lawyer. She wanted legal protection from Victor's harassment, she wanted a divorce, she wanted to start a new life. The lawyer listened to Rosie and promised to help. He prepared all the necessary documents and filed a lawsuit with the court. The morning was gloomy and damp, as if reflecting Rosie's inner state. It was as if nature itself knew, today, the man she had once trusted completely would finally leave her life. Victor's and Freddie's belongings were gathered in the hallway, neatly stacked in boxes and bags. The lawyer had insisted that the transfer of belongings take place in the presence of a local police officer, and Rosie, not wanting any more scenes, had agreed. The doorbell rang. Rosie flinched as if struck, but quickly composed herself. Victor stood on the doorstep. His face was aged, unshaven, and his eyes held sleepless nights and the bitterness of defeat. Beside him, clinging to his leg, stood Freddie, with a backpack on his shoulders and a guilty look in his eyes that mixed fear, sadness, and incomprehension. "Everything's ready," Rosie said calmly, stepping aside and allowing them to enter. Victor didn't utter a word. He silently began to carry things into the stairwell, avoiding Rosie's gaze. Freddie remained in the hallway, not daring to move. Rosie approached him, crouching down. "Freddie," she said softly. "You're a good boy. This isn't your fault. It's just that sometimes adults make mistakes that can't be fixed. I want you to be happy. Okay?" The boy nodded, and tears welled up in his eyes. He rushed to her, hugged her tightly, with childish naivety and sincerity. Rosie held him close, feeling something break inside. This was their farewell. When the door closed behind Victor and his son, the apartment became especially quiet. Rosie stood in the middle of the empty hallway, looking at the cleared space where just recently strangers, yet people who had become part of her life, had lived. She didn't cry. The tears had already been shed, in the night, in solitude, in the silence of the bathroom. Now there was only emptiness and a certain freedom. She had finally done what she had been so afraid of for so long. She had chosen herself. Rosie turned on the music, opened the windows wide, and began to tidy up the apartment. She washed the bedding, mopped the floors, and threw away all the little things that reminded her of Victor. This day became a symbolic cleansing, a step towards a new life, without fear, pain, and self-deception. In the afternoon, Daisy came with a box of pastries and a bottle of wine. She hugged Rosie without asking unnecessary questions and only said, "You did great, Rosie. Really. Everything is just beginning." Rosie smiled. For the first time in a long time, a genuine smile.
Thank you for listening to my story.